The morning heat shimmered above the airfield at Charters Towers, Queensland. Mechanics wiped sweat from their brows as they circled a line of worn bombers baking under the Pacific sun. In the middle of it all stood a man in his 40s, sleeves rolled, eyes fixed on the machine before him. Paul Irvin Pappy Gunn had spent a lifetime fixing airplanes, but today he was building a weapon that could change the war. He wasn't thinking about glory or medals. His thoughts were with his wife and 4 children held in a Japanese internment camp nearly 2,000 miles away. Each hour they endured, there felt like another reminder that he had to shorten this war by any means. The B-25s around him were supposed to be safe, medium-altitude bombers, but safety wasn't winning battles. Gunn believed that if he could make them hit low, fast, and brutally hard, they might finally stop the convoys feeding Japan's island garrisons. When the North American B-25 Mitchell first rolled out in 1941, it was a fine piece of engineering. Twin engines, 6-man crew, bomb load built for altitude. On paper it was efficient. In the jungles of New Guinea it was useless. Bombs fell into the canopy, disappeared into the trees, and enemy ships slipped through untouched. Pilots risked flak and fighters only to score random hits that changed nothing. The Pacific War needed a new idea, and Gunn's greasy hands were about to deliver it. He had already proven something once. Months earlier he'd torn apart a Douglas A-20 Havoc, ripped out its glass nose, and filled it with salvaged .50 caliber machine guns scavenged from wrecked fighters. Those few guns turned a light bomber into a ship-eating monster that raked airfields and shredded transports along the coast. Now he wanted to do the same with the bigger Mitchell. But the B-25 wasn't meant for that kind of punishment. Add too much weight to the nose and the plane would pitch forward like a hammer. Mount too many guns and the recoil could shake the frame apart. Gunn didn't have blueprints or factory approval, just instinct, a few helpers, and the urgency of a man who'd already lost everything but his will. By late 1942, he had built his first prototype. The clear bombardier's glass was gone, replaced by solid metal panels drilled to hold 4 heavy Brownings. Under each wing, he fitted 2 more in blister pods, then linked them to fire together. A second later, the airfield echoed with a mechanical roar as all guns spat lead into the test range. The recoil slammed through the fuselage, but the Mitchell held. Gunn grinned. The monster lived. Word reached General George C. Kenney, the blunt, fast-thinking commander of the Southwest Pacific Air Forces. When he saw Gunn's work, he didn't see a violation of design orders. He saw the edge his crews desperately needed. Kenney made Gunn his special projects officer with a single directive: make them deadlier and make them fast. For weeks the hangars buzzed. Sparks flew from welders, barrels clanked onto wooden benches, and ammo belts piled waist-high. Gunn's men worked by lantern light, improvising mounts from spare piping and scraps of steel. The air smelled of oil, metal dust, and caffeine. Every night he looked toward the north, imagining the camp in Manila, whispering that every bolt tightened here might bring his family closer to freedom. When the first flight test came, pilots crouched in their seats like race car drivers. The bomber lifted heavy-nosed but steady, engines howling in perfect sync. At 200 feet above the water, it opened fire, tracing a solid river of bullets that churned the ocean white. The smell of gunpowder filled the cabin. It wasn't elegant, but it worked. Gunn's gamble had turned a bomber into a predator. The real proof came in September 1942 over Buna Airfield in New Guinea. Gunn's modified A-20s streaked in at treetop level before defenders could react. Anti-aircraft gunners barely swung their barrels before being buried under streams of .50 caliber fire. Parafrag bombs floated down on parachutes, erupting above fuel dumps and aircraft lined on the runway. When the smoke cleared, Buna burned. That success lit the path to something far larger. A B-25 that could fly low, strafe hard, and survive it. Gunn's crews expanded the design, cheek guns on each side, synchronized turrets firing forward, even heavier armor around the cockpit. Some versions carried 14 guns in total, producing a torrent of lead so dense it seemed to slice the horizon itself. The old bomber had become a flying buzzsaw, and the Japanese would soon feel it. But before it reached perfection, there was a battle waiting, a test so massive that if Gunn's creation failed, Thousands of men would die. The name of that battle was the Bismarck Sea, and its outcome would decide whether his Fury-built machines truly worked. Metal groaned in the humid air as mechanics loaded ammunition into the new strafers. Somewhere beyond the clouds, a Japanese convoy was already on the move. The first days of March 1943 brought storms over the Solomon Sea, but behind those gray clouds, the greatest low-level assault of the Pacific was forming. Allied reconnaissance had spotted 8 Japanese transports and 8 destroyers sailing from Rabaul toward Leh, packed with nearly 7,000 troops and supplies. If they reached shore, they could fortify the front for months. General Kenny knew this convoy had to vanish, every ship, every soldier. High-altitude B-17s struck first, their bombs falling through cloud gaps, scoring a few lucky hits. But the real strike force waited below the weather. Pappy Gunn's B-25 strafers and their skip-bombing partners. They took off from New Guinea's muddy strips, heavy with 500-pound bombs and belts of ammunition. Pilots checked their guns one last time, the smell of cordite already clinging to the cockpit air. Gunn watched them go, the engines pounding like war drums against the jungle. At sunrise on March 3rd, the clouds broke. The Japanese convoy cut through blue water, unaware that death was racing low across the horizon. The first formation of B-25s appeared like shadows skimming the waves. Spray whipped across their windshields. The ships opened fire. Tracers streaked upward in orange chains, but the strafers came on. 14 guns per plane, thousands of rounds every minute, a storm of steel tearing into decks and gun crews before they could aim again. You can almost feel their heartbeat in that silence before impact. Then came the skip bombers behind them. Flying so low their propellers carved the sea foam, they released their bombs with a shallow throw. The 500-pounders bounced once, twice, then slammed into hulls at waterline height. The explosions ripped the ships open from the inside out. Flames burst across the decks. Men leapt into the sea as fuel tanks erupted. Within minutes, the convoy dissolved into chaos. Every time a ship tried to turn, strafers were waiting, chewing through bridges and lifeboats. Japanese destroyers fought back bravely, their guns tracing fiery arcs, but even steel could not stand against that much concentrated fire. One destroyer took a bomb amidships and folded in half. Another's magazines ignited, turning it into a rolling inferno. The sea boiled with debris and burning oil. For 3 days, the onslaught continued. Whenever a rescue attempt began, Allied planes struck again. Some crews felt guilty firing on rafts and lifeboats, but they knew those survivors would fight again on land. War in the Pacific allowed no mercy. It demanded efficiency. By March 4th, the Bismarck Sea was littered with wreckage. All 8 transports had sunk, along with 4 destroyers. More than 3,000 Japanese soldiers perished. Fewer than 1,000 reached shore, most to be captured or killed soon after. Allied losses were just 4 planes and 13 airmen. Historians would later call it one of the most one-sided victories in modern warfare. For General Kenny, the verdict was clear. Pappy Gunn's field conversions had changed the rules. Orders flew to every base. Convert every B-25 possible. Depots in Australia worked around the clock. Welders and mechanics turned standard bombers into nose-heavy beasts bristling with guns. Other air forces took note, requesting the same upgrades. The strafer had become doctrine. North American aviation in California soon caught up. Reports of Gunn's success reached the factory floor, where engineers re-examined their blueprints. By late 1943, the company unveiled the B-25G, fitted with a 75mm M4 cannon, the same caliber used in Sherman tanks. In theory, it could blast a destroyer apart from 2 miles away. In practice, the recoil nearly tore the nose off each time it fired. Pilots joked that you could measure accuracy by how long your teeth rattled afterward. Loading the cannon by hand after every shot made it slow and awkward. Still, the idea was bold, proof that the factory now followed the field. Soon, the H&J models refined Gunn's simpler logic. Fewer experiments, more 50-caliber guns. The B-25J carried up to 18 of them, 8 in the nose, 4 on the sides, and the rest spread across turret and tail. In combat, 14 of those could fire forward at once, pouring out more than 15,000 rounds a minute. The old medium bomber had become a force that even warships feared. But Gunn never cared about credit. By the time those new models rolled off assembly lines, he was back in the Pacific, flying missions, bleeding in his seat 9 different times but refusing to stop. His men said he seemed to fly possessed, as if every bullet he fired was meant to shorten his family's suffering back in Manila. What came next would turn invention into legacy. Even Steele remembers the storms that shaped it. By late 1944, the war had shifted north toward the Philippines, and Pappy Gunn went back with it. His modified bombers now flew daily raids against Japanese shipping, cutting off supply lines island by island. When Leyte Gulf became the stage for the largest naval battle in history, his strafer B-25s pounded coastal convoys, airfields, and troop barges with such ferocity that even enemy pilots wrote warnings in captured manuals. Do not engage these aircraft at low altitude. Their fire is overwhelming. But victory carried a cost. During one air raid on a Philippine base, Japanese bombs fell without warning. Shrapnel tore through the area where Gunn was working, wounding him badly, his 9th combat injury. Commanders finally grounded him, sending him stateside to oversee production at North Americans' factories. It was recognition, but for him it felt like exile. He didn't want to design from a desk. He wanted to fly where it mattered. Back home, engineers surrounded him with gratitude and curiosity. They called him the man who built a gunship with his hands. He taught them what the manuals never could, how field mechanics learned to trust vibration through their fingertips, how a bullet belt sounded when tension was perfect, how a plane's soul changed once its glass nose turned to steel. Those lessons shaped the next generation of combat aircraft, and quietly, the future of aerial warfare itself. Then, in February 1945, the war came full circle. American troops entered Manila, fighting house to house. When they reached the gates of the University of Santo Tomas, they found thousands of emaciated civilians behind barbed wire. Among them, Clara Louise Gunn and the 4 children Pappy had been fighting for since 1942. Their reunion was described as almost unreal. A thin, trembling woman, 4 pale faces, and a father scarred by battle finally standing in the same sunlight again. For them, survival looked nothing like glory. Gunn stayed with the service until 1948, retiring as a full colonel after 3 decades in uniform. He went back to the Philippines to rebuild Philippine Airlines, the civilian company he had helped found before the war. His work shifted from weapons to wings for peace, yet storms followed him still. In 1957, while flying a chartered Beechcraft through heavy tropical rain, the plane went down. He was 57 years old. The islands he had defended became his final resting place. Even after his death, his ideas refused to die. The U.S. Air Force's doctrine on close air support carried his fingerprints. When the Korean War broke out, modified B-25s with forward-firing guns returned to the sky, using his low-level tactics to smash supply lines. 2 decades later, as American involvement deepened in Vietnam, engineers designing a new kind of gunship studied his field notes. The AC-47, Spooky, and the AC-130 Spectre both owed their concept to Gunn's improvisation. Take a transport or bomber, fit it with multiple heavy guns, and make it circle a target until nothing moved. Some stories end in parades. His ended in echoes. Every time a modern gunship arcs over a battlefield, somewhere in its design lives the spirit of that Arkansas blacksmith's son who turned desperation into invention. History often celebrates the scientists in clean laboratories, but the Pacific proved that brilliance can also rise from sweat, grime, and fear. Gunn's legacy was not a single aircraft. It was a mindset. When the rulebook fails, build something new. His improvised B-25s didn't just sink ships. They sank the idea that only official design could win wars. Maybe that's why his name still surfaces in hangars and history classes, whispered with respect by pilots who understand what it means to fight with what you have. Because long before technology made precision easy, Pappy Gunn showed the world that determination could aim straighter than any gun sight. And that's where his story leaves us, still listening to the hum of engines he once made roar. After the guns fell silent in 1945, the Pacific was a patchwork of ruined runways and rusting wrecks. Yet amid that devastation, stories of ingenuity like guns spread quietly through air bases from Australia to Okinawa. Mechanics talked about the father of the strafer who had proven that courage and a wrench could outpace any blueprint. Young pilots listened wide-eyed, learning that the best ideas often came not from headquarters, but from hangars that smelled of oil and rain. The lessons went deeper than machinery. Gun-AS improvisations had given birth to a principle that engineers would later call adaptive design, the ability to modify an existing system under extreme pressure. His conversions had done more than make bombers deadlier. They had shown that field innovation could redefine warfare faster than any research lab. That insight changed how the Air Force approached every future conflict. By the early 1950s, the jet age was transforming aviation, but the core philosophy remained. Whenever an aircraft was too slow, too light, or too limited, designers asked the same question Gunn had whispered over his first B-25. What if we had more firepower exactly where it needed most? From that thought came rocket pods on fighters, side-mounted cannons on transports, and the rotating gun turrets of helicopters. Each of these carried traces of Gunn's thinking, simplicity, power, and precision earned through risk. In classrooms at flight schools, instructors cited the Battle of the Bismarck Sea as a textbook example of innovation under pressure. Charts showed how skip bombing, born from desperation, achieved a 90% hit rate within months. Film reels flickered with footage of Japanese transports vanishing under curtains of spray and flame. Cadets studied how those low-level tactics forced enemy convoys to shift to night operations, giving Allied forces freedom to advance by day. Every statistic echoed one man's relentless question: what else can this plane do if we stop being afraid to change it? Yet behind the legend was always the human cost. Pappy Gunn's hands never fully healed from years of wrench work and burns. His hearing faded from engine roar and gunfire. Friends said he could still recall the smell of cordite and the scream of the wind under wings at 50 feet. When people thanked him for his inventions, he only shook his head. "I just wanted to get my family back," he said once quietly. You can almost feel their heartbeat in that silence. For the 55-plus generation who lived through that era, his story became more than war history. It was a reminder of resourcefulness. They remembered ration books, recycled metal drives, and neighbors who fixed everything themselves. Gunn symbolized that spirit, the belief that when systems fail, ordinary hands can still make miracles. As the Cold War unfolded, the Air Force embraced gunship doctrine fully. The AC-130, bristling with side-firing howitzers and computer-controlled targeting, became the direct heir to Gunn's low-level strafers. Its crews even painted nose art in homage to the Mitchells of 1943. Engineers studying those massive aircraft noted that their mission profile, long loiter time, precise suppression, devastating firepower, matched Gunn's blueprints almost line for line. The difference was technology. The philosophy remained pure Pappy. By the time digital avionics replaced analog dials, Gunn's name had faded from popular memory, overshadowed by the aircraft themselves. But in the quiet corners of museums you can still find his fingerprints. Bullet-scarred nose panels, field sketches of gun mounts drawn on scrap paper, maintenance notes signed in grease pencil. They tell the story of a man who saw metal not as limitation, but as clay waiting to be reshaped. Some stories don't end. They just fade into memory. Through the 1960s and 70s, the world kept inventing faster jets and smarter bombs, yet every generation of airmen found itself returning to Gunn's basic rule: power plus precision equals survival. When Vietnam demanded close air support over dense jungles, the Air Force revived his thinking, almost word for word. They mounted side-firing guns on transport planes, flying slow circles over the battlefield to deliver pinpoint fire. The AC-47 Spooky became the first modern gunship, spraying red tracers into the night sky like fiery rain. Soldiers below nicknamed it Puff the Magic Dragon, a gentle name for a weapon born of Gunn's fierce practicality. The line from his B-25 Strafer to the AC-130 Spectre was unmistakable. The Spectre's massive 105mm cannon and digital sensors were the high-tech descendants of his bolt-on 50s and seat-of-the-pants targeting. Crews even used the same language he once had. On station, suppress, clear hot. Every burst of automatic fire that lit the jungle was a distant echo of those low-level runs over the Bismarck Sea. For historians, Gunn's legacy offers a strange symmetry. A man who started as a Navy mechanic ended up shaping Air Force doctrine for decades. His improvisation blurred the lines between engineer, pilot, and soldier. It proved that invention could come from the field just as surely as from the laboratory. Even today, when technicians modify drones or retrofit aircraft in combat zones, they are continuing his tradition of solving problems in real time, not waiting for permission. His influence also reached far beyond combat. Civilian aviation adopted his maintenance principles: modular repair, field interchangeability, creative reuse of damaged parts. Philippine Airlines, which he rebuilt after the war, grew into a regional carrier that carried travelers instead of bombs. In a quiet way, his second life gave back what his first had taken away: flight without fear. Still, veterans who flew his designs never forgot the man himself. They spoke of him as part engineer, part preacher, part storm. When he walked into a hangar, conversations stopped. He would lay a palm on the metal skin of a bomber as if feeling its pulse. "Airplanes talk," he told a young mechanic once. "You just have to listen before they break." That sense of communion between man and machine made him different. To his crews, he wasn't a myth. He was proof that imagination could save lives. Even now, air museums across the Pacific show restored B-25s painted in olive drab, their noses bristling with black gun barrels. Visitors run their hands over the cold steel and imagine the roar of those engines skimming wavetops. Somewhere behind that hum is the ghost of a man who built monsters not for destruction's sake, but to bring his family home. But the real storm hadn't even started yet. Gunn's work would soon cross oceans of time, shaping how the modern world understands innovation itself. By the late 20th century, aviation had changed beyond recognition. Jets broke the sound barrier, missiles replaced dogfights, and satellites watched every mile of ocean. But the spirit of hands-on innovation that Pappy Gunn had ignited never left the hangar floor. Engineers building stealth aircraft and drone fleets still relied on one of his oldest lessons: simplicity saves lives. A design that can be fixed under pressure is worth more than 1,000 that only work on paper. At air shows across America, veterans gathered around restored Mitchells, their olive paint glinting in the sunlight. They told younger visitors that this airplane, once considered obsolete, had rewritten Pacific warfare because one man refused to wait for permission. Kids climbed into the cockpits, tracing fingers across the triggers of silent guns, while guides explained how each barrel had been scavenged, remounted, and tested with nothing but grit and guesswork. Those moments turned history into heartbeat. Modern militaries still cite Gunn's methods in manuals about field modification and decentralized decision-making. The United States Air Force Academy teaches his work under the banner of practical innovation, linking his jury-rigged bombers to modern rapid prototype programs. His mindset lives on whenever a field crew fabricates a missing part with a 3D printer or rewires a sensor to keep a drone operational. Technology changes, but the need to improvise under fire never does. Somewhere above a training range, an AC-130 circles in the dark, its cannons thudding in precise rhythm. Below, laser designators flicker, and the battlefield blooms with controlled bursts of light. The pilots know the lineage, from the B-25s roaring nose guns to the digitized fire control system they use now. The same principle guides both: put overwhelming, accurate fire exactly where it's needed, then get your people home. When historians look back, they see more than a man who modified planes. They see an argument about how progress works. Bureaucracy builds slowly, necessity builds fast. Gunn's approach fused both: testing in battle, refining in real time, and sharing results with anyone who would listen. His work became an early model of feedback-driven engineering decades before the term existed. In museums, plaques summarize his achievements, But the real monument is motion itself, the idea that even the smallest workshop can influence the outcome of a war or a world. Every time a pilot feels the vibration of an aircraft pushing against air, every time a mechanic wipes sweat from their eyes beneath the wing and thinks, maybe we can make this better, the legacy continues. What came next would carry his influence even farther, beyond warfare, into the everyday technologies that keep people moving and connected. By the 1980s, aviation technology had reached a sophistication Gunn could never have imagined. Computers guiding missiles, radar locking targets beyond the horizon. But even in that era of silicon and circuitry, his name still surfaced among those who built and flew. Old-timers who had once served under him spoke about a gun fix, a field-made solution that worked better than the manual ever promised. In aerospace labs, engineers studying rapid adaptation looked back at his methods as early examples of agile development. He had prototyped, tested, and deployed in real time, without bureaucracy slowing him down. That rhythm of test, learn, improve became the same cycle used decades later in both engineering and software design. Gunn's ghost, it seemed, had quietly slipped into every field where necessity met invention. As nations shifted focus from war to exploration, the spirit of his approach followed. When NASA technicians improvised repairs on the Apollo missions, veterans recognized the pattern, hands finding answers faster than committees. "We pulled a Pappy Gunn," one engineer reportedly joked after rigging a temporary oxygen fix aboard a simulator in the 1970s. The term became shorthand for fearless creativity under pressure. In the Philippines, his adopted homeland, aviators honored him as a pioneer. Each anniversary of Philippine Airlines' founding brought tributes not just for corporate success, but for the man who helped restart flight across islands still scarred by war. His legacy was no longer about destruction but connection, routes that stitched communities together, aircraft that carried medicine instead of bombs, families instead of soldiers. The same mind that had once built gunships now symbolized renewal. Historians began to revisit his story, realizing it represented a larger truth about 20th century progress. Innovation, they noted, didn't belong only to inventors in polished laboratories. It thrived in hangars, workshops, and battlefields where failure meant death, not delay. Gunn's improvisations proved that creativity born of crisis could outlast empires and influence peace. For audiences who remember the war years, his journey speaks of resilience. For younger generations, it's a study in what determination looks like when resources run dry. The next time a new aircraft rolls off an assembly line or a pilot trusts a system designed to survive chaos there, as a faint line connecting that moment back to the man in the tin hangar at Charters Towers, wiping grease from his hands and staring at a bomber that no longer obeyed its blueprints. You can almost see the reflection of his torchlight flicker on polished aluminum. One man, S. Fury, turned into the world, S. Endurance. By the early 2000s, technology had turned battlefields into networks and cockpits into glass screens. Yet even in an age of satellites and drones, airmen still repeated Gunn's unwritten creed: make it work, then make it perfect. Commanders cited him during briefings on adaptability, reminding crews that no amount of automation could replace the human instinct to improvise when systems failed. In Afghanistan and Iraq, mechanics often faced shortages of parts and time. They welded, rewired, and repurposed gear just as Gunn's team had done under that tin roof in Queensland. Some even pinned his photo inside hangars as a quiet good luck charm, the patron saint of field fixes. Meanwhile, historians began to gather oral accounts from the few remaining veterans who had flown his modified B-25s. They described the physical shock of firing all those guns at once, the way the plane seemed to pause mid-air under recoil, and the eerie silence afterward. "You didn't hear victory," one recalled. "You heard the ocean swallowing what used to be an enemy ship." Those memories turned Gunn's story from technical legend into human testament. Museums across the United States and Australia restored B-25 strafers with painstaking care. Curators consulted wartime photos, matching paint schemes, numbering gun mounts, and recreating the very welding seams gunsmen had made by hand. When engines started for demonstrations, the crowd felt the sound more than heard it. a deep vibration that seemed to come from history itself. Children clapped, veterans saluted, and for a moment, time blurred between 1943 and now. Every restoration carried a message deeper than nostalgia. It reminded visitors that innovation often begins with fear and love intertwined, the fear of losing what matters, and the love that refuses to let it happen. Gunn's war had been personal. Every modification, every sortie, had been a promise whispered toward Manila. That emotional core turned mechanics into warriors and machines into extensions of will. Today, the same idea shapes humanitarian aviation. Cargo planes modified to drop food, drones redesigned to deliver medicine, rescue aircraft adapted for flood zones. Each adaptation traces back to Gunn's belief that technology should bend to human need, not the other way around. His influence lives in every emergency airlift and improvised solution that saves lives instead of taking them. And when modern pilots study low-level tactics or engineers debug flight software under pressure, they still ask the question that started it all. What if we just add more guns, or more heart, to the problem? History didn't end there, it just paused to breathe. By the 2010s, a new generation of storytellers rediscovered Gunn's legacy through documentaries, podcasts, and online archives. Digital restoration brought old combat footage to life, the strafing runs, the skip bomb explosions, the pilots shouting over engine roar. Millions watched and marveled that one man's field fix had reshaped air power for half a century. In classrooms, his name resurfaced as a symbol of ingenuity under impossible odds. At the U.S. Air Force Museum, a B-25J strafer sits under soft lighting, its barrels gleaming black. Visitors lean close to read the plaque. Modified in the field by Colonel Paul Irvin, Pappy Gunn, prototype of the modern gunship. Nearby, a video plays grainy clips of Allied aircraft diving through tropical storms. Each round fired, each trail of smoke tells the same story, improvisation defeating orthodoxy. Students studying leadership quote him in essays about creativity. Business schools dissect his choices as lessons in innovation under pressure. How urgency can drive solutions faster than budgets or committees ever could. Even in technology startups, founders borrow his mantra: build, test, refine, repeat. The connection might seem distant, but the mindset is identical. In the Philippines, memorial flights mark his birthday each October. Pilots fly low over the coastlines he once patrolled, engines echoing through the same humid air. Locals look up and wave, remembering a man who refused to give up when the world around him burned. For them, he isn't just a wartime engineer. He's the father of Philippine commercial aviation, a bridge between destruction and renewal. Through these tributes, his humanity finally outshines his hardware. He was never chasing perfection, only purpose. When asked once what he wanted to be remembered for, he reportedly smiled and said, "For getting the job done." That simple answer holds everything: courage, craftsmanship, and care. For older viewers who lived through black and white newsreels and ration lines, Gunn's story feels like home, a time when people fixed the world with what they had. For younger audiences, it's a spark, proof that even in the most advanced age, creativity still begins with dirty hands and stubborn hearts. Some endings don't close, they echo. The story didn't end with the veterans or the museums. It lived on in the way people approached creativity itself. Engineers, teachers, and creators began quoting Gunn as an example of practical genius, the rare ability to turn frustration into fuel. His story became required reading not just for military historians, but for design students who wanted to understand what innovation under fire really meant. When modern filmmakers recreated the Battle of the Bismarck Sea using CGI, they based their models on Gunn's own field sketches. The sight of a B-25 Mitchell sweeping across waves at 50 feet, guns blazing, still made audiences hold their breath. It wasn't just nostalgia, it was respect. The film ended with a quiet shot of Gunn in his workshop, wrench in hand, light catching the sweat on his forehead. For a moment, everyone watching could feel what he felt: the weight of loss, the heat of purpose, and the fragile hope that invention might save the people he loved. Even the internet age found something timeless in his journey. Online forums for aviation restoration and DIY mechanics traded gun hacks, celebrating solutions made with limited tools and limitless determination. One veteran's grandson wrote, "My grandfather said gun taught him that a problem is just a machine waiting to be reassembled." That line spread faster than any headline. Today, when an AC-130 circles a battlefield with precision sensors and laser-guided rounds, its crews trace their lineage to that first mechanic in Queensland. When humanitarian pilots drop aid over disaster zones, they echo his belief that an aircraft's purpose is defined not by what it was built to do, but by what it needs to do. Pappy Gunn's story isn't only about war. It's about defiance against limitation. It's about the moment a man refuses to accept that the world must stay broken. And maybe that's why, 8 decades later, his legacy still hums in every engine that starts, in every workshop where someone looks at a broken part and says, "Let's make it work." Even now, you can hear the echo of that night, the roar of engines, the rain of bullets, and the silence that followed when one man's fury turned into freedom. And somewhere, a small light kept burning.